Say my name. I am awake. I am the danger. I am the one who knocks.
Welcome back to Breaking Into Breaking Bad with Clifford Humphrey and Caleb Humphrey. Today we're talking about season 1, episode 4, Cancer Man. So let's get right into it. Obviously, this episode's about Walt's revelation to the family that he has cancer. And it ended on a note, the previous episode, and we kind of knew this was coming.
Right.
So you said when we were talking earlier, Caleb, that you thought this was kind of a filler episode. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, there wasn't they didn't have to kill anybody. There was no drastic, like the first 3 episodes ahead of us all had something crazy that was happening. So this was more dialogue, I felt like, than
Mm-hmm.
anything. Still solid, but nothing to the point where, Walt was deciding whether to kill or not kill somebody. Um,
Yeah. Well, I think there's still some important things in here to note. So let's dive in
yep.
and talk about that. So it starts off, Hank is talking to some other people at the DEA, and he says there's a new kingpin in town, and he's already starting to put some dots together, right? Like
Hmm.
he knows that this meth that he found in Crazy Eight's car that Walt made was irregular, was a higher quality than he's ever seen, and he assumes there's something new is about, and that there's somebody who's high powerful person who's changing the meth game in the New Mexico area market. So he's starting to put some dots together, and we're going to see more about that, I think, in the future. But already, it's important to know Hank's a smart guy. Would you say, when it
Yeah,
comes to
like
this kind of thing?
when it comes to his craft, he is exceptionally good at it, like even in the last episode when he was checking Crazy Eight's car, Gomi, his partner, had said, "Hey, I already checked it. No need to do it." And he was, "Are you sure?" And so he was able to go through and find the
Hmm.
bag of meth in there. But yeah, like when he sent it to the lab, it came back at 99 point, what was it, 99.1% pure, which something that he hasn't seen before. And so that probably was the biggest like indicator of, whoa, we're dealing with somebody much better than I've ever dealt with. This is not your normal,
Hmm.
you
Hmm.
know,
Yeah.
street thug. So yeah.
When I think about the way that Hank is putting together all these details, I think back to some things you told me when you were working in loss prevention. You kind of got interested in and started to understand better the criminal mind.
Yep.
And you would tell us things like you would know when someone was about to do something, and you got to the point where you knew exactly what they were going to do. Am I right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you would start to see patterns, based off of repetition. So it's like,
Uh-huh.
all right, you've seen this happen several times, and here we
They
go.
think that no
It's
one's
about to
watching them.
happen.
They go into this corner and they think no one can
Yep.
see them. And
Yeah.
right. So it's not unusual, in other words, that Hank could get
Y-
to be this good. It's not just like they didn't
Right.
just write it in there. So Hank is on the case, and he's getting good. All right. Well, so Walt tells the family, and the way it kind of comes out is actually really sad. I thought it was well written. The way they weave it into his telling the story of how he and Skylar met, which is kind of a
Yeah.
romantic, believable story. And we
Hmm.
see Skylar kind of laughing and then starting to tear up, and then she starts to cry. And it's very believable. Yeah, she's thinking back to happy memories and thoughts of their beginning. And now she's very conscious that it could be ending. So she's really sad. So that was well done, I thought.
I thought it was kind of weird in the sense of, like she's obviously going through this thing, and we all know, right? Because we're watching. And, and then, like you put yourself in that position. If you saw that, you saw someone crying, I guess any response is different, but you see Hank just, whoa, Skylar, like it's, it's like he just blurts that out,
Yeah,
and
there's rarely
she
a
gets
thought that comes into Hank's mind that he doesn't
right.
let
He
come out
just
through
he
his mouth.
just
Yeah.
splurts it out,
Right.
and
Right.
then
Right. Right.
she just says, let him tell you, and then obviously that alerts Marie to Walt,
Right.
you know.
Yeah.
Um,
Now, throughout this whole episode, Walt is recovering from the shock of having killed Crazy Eight.
right.
He's probably dealing with some kind of denial and his conscience, right? But it's pretty clear that in this episode, he has convinced himself, I'm never going to go back into that. That's done. That was a crazy thing. And now I've just got to look the consequences square in the face and
Mm-hmm.
and deal with it. And so he's carrying on as though that's the case, which makes this episode, though it is kind of a filler, like you said, I think it is kind of important because it's this episode where we see him deciding, no, I'm not going to do that. Right. And,
Mm-hmm.
and to jump ahead a little bit, when Jesse shows up with the money, which is almost
Right.
exactly the amount that he needs for the diagnosis for his cancer, you see the temptation to jump back in there. Well, maybe just a little bit more. Maybe I'll just go do one more. Right. You see how that temptation is being teed up for him.
Right.
And he's still very vulnerable to that temptation because it's so fresh, even though he's sort of sworn off forever. I'm not going to do that again, because of how horrible it was. I mean, they barely
Well, yeah,
got out.
he was pretty shocked when Jesse showed up at first. Like when Jesse showed up, he was like, "Hey, like my buddies think it was the bomb, what you cooked, and maybe we can do something." And he goes, "What?" Like he was almost taken back by the fact that he would want to,
Mm-hmm.
after what they've just done.
Right.
Like why would you
Yeah.
think about this?
Yeah. And that's telling, right? It means that Jesse has lived this life a little bit longer. He's seen some
Mhm.
crazy and he's used to that. Although it was still shocking for him, we get the idea it wasn't his first time dealing with, rough people and maybe violence and murder. He's seen
Right.
all that. So for Walt, it was extremely shocking. But for Jesse, he bounced back pretty quickly with this temptation. Yeah, well, maybe I guess we could just do it one more time.
Right. Well, I obviously the conversations that he had with his two friends who you don't know their names yet. They were like, "Hey, do you got anything?" And he was like, "Well, yeah, I do, but
Right.
I don't know because he's paranoid in this episode. If you don't know, like he's completely freaked out the whole time.
Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
seeing things. You don't know if he's high or if he's just like reliving certain things
Well,
that
they're
he
they're
went
both
through.
paranoid. They're both
Yeah,
paranoid.
yeah,
When that
absolutely.
when Walt is driving down the road and that cop comes up behind him when he's
Yeah,
got the money on him, he pulls over and he's terrified, right? But the whole time the paranoia is haunting them. And I think that's the conscience still there.
yeah. I love that because wouldn't you be experiencing the same scenario?
Hmm.
Like
Hmm.
you're a straight laced guy, and then you decide over the last month to do all these opposite things. Yeah, I would be freaked out too. Every time I heard a siren, I'd be like,
But
oh no,
it's not just straight-laced Walt, right? It's Jesse too. He knows
Yeah,
that it's not out of the question that Crazy Eight could have had allies with these two biker guys that show up. Right? Turns out it's just two Mormons, but in his
yeah,
mind, right, he's paranoid too. So it's not just Walt who recently broke bad. It's
right.
Jesse too. There's something about the murder, I think, and the dealing with the bodies that they had to deal with. Oh, by the
Yep.
way, we don't know what they did with Crazy Eight's body, do we?
No, they never, I guess in a weird way, spoiler, but Jesse never once questioned, so what did you do with it? Like he just, once he saw that the basement was empty and he saw the bike lock on the side, like he just assumed that was taken care of. So my
We don't.
guess, we don't know. I guess that Walt, being the scientist, he actually got probably a plastic drum, dissolved the body, and maybe poured it down the toilet. I don't know. They never go into that more than what we saw.
Interesting.
So
Interesting.
yeah.
Well, whatever it was dealing with Emilio was enough for Jesse to be freaked out. Now, I don't know,
Right.
I don't know much about these drugs. I know that marijuana often, I hear makes people kind of paranoid. But does methamphetamine, does that have the same effect? Do you know?
I I have no idea. Never once tried it, you know.
Yeah.
You would think we'd maybe
So we don't know if
interview
if
some
it's
people on this, but
right. Maybe we should have tried it, just to kind of identify with the.
yep,
Right.
be professional about it. Yep.
Yeah, right. So we don't know if it was an effect of the drug that Jesse starts to feel paranoid, or if it's his conscience getting to him. I think it's
Right. I would
probably a
like
little of both, right?
little both. Yeah, I would say it because you see him smoke up a couple times in this episode, but
Yeah.
him to be paranoid enough to go home, and then we get a little bit of his family and this little brother
hmm
in this
Yeah.
episode.
So before we go there, I think it's important to note about his friends. I think Jesse's incredibly lonely.
Yep.
He's
100%.
desperate for company, right? And the
Yep.
only people he can get to hang out with him are these real low life, and they're not really his friends, right? They're not interested in him. They just want to know what he can do for them
They just want some meth,
for free. Yeah, they just want free meth.
Right. The moment that he says like, "Hey, I'm thinking about, for health reasons, probably
Yeah, no,
laying
that's
off on it."
critical. That's
That
critical.
is
It means they don't
critical
really care about his health, right? They don't care that
because
he's
they want to bounce right away. He goes, "All right, well, you know what? I'm going to get going." Right when he says no.
right,
And he was like, "Whoa, what do you mean? I'm joking. This is, sit down. I'm going to give it to you." So yes,
right,
he's
right.
in a sense he is buying their friendship, and
Yeah, that's right.
it's pathetic. It's sad. It's one of those scenarios where
But then what does
this
he do
is
immediately after that, right? And when he after he has the scare and he leaves his house,
right,
he goes home.
right to the one place that he knows that he will be loved. He did
It's a
have
complicated story, right?
it
I
is,
think
right?
I think it's important for us to see his home
Yep.
because it's important for us to know that's his choice. His choice is always come home and get sober, and that's what he has waiting for him. He has two parents who love him. He's got a younger brother who in a way shows all the things he could be, right?
Yep.
So it's important for us to know at almost at any point Jesse could have that if he
Yep.
wanted it. Now there's the complication, when he's talking with his brother and they find the joint and it's his little brother's, and he saves his little brother, right? He takes the hit for him, or he takes the blame, and he knows it's his little brother. I don't know what you thought about that, but there's that scene when he is in his little brother's room and they're talking, and then the mother comes in and opens the door and leaves it open, right?
Yep.
And he says, "What are they afraid that I'm going to warp your mind?" And then what happens? He starts his little brother, who seems like the kind of guy who, when you first hear about his accomplishments and the things he's doing, you think he's thinking, I don't want to be like my older brother. I want to be different. And that's
Right.
why I'm doing all these things. And then you find out, nope, he actually wants to be like his older brother. And so he starts to get the marijuana, even though it's,
Right.
what do you call
Well,
it?
you remember what
Fake
he
weed or whatever.
said? He said when Jesse said, "Man, what do you think I'm going to warp your mind?" Their favorite son, and that was key because he
Yeah,
goes,
that's right.
"What do you mean favorite son? You're all they ever talk about, talking
Yeah.
about Jesse." And so that is probably where he thinks like, "Well, that's all they ever talk about. Of course I want to be like Jesse." Like
Have a few problems and they'll love you
right,
more and they'll
like
care.
look
Yeah.
at Jesse. He's living on his own. Like he's probably picking up things that where they talk about as negatives that he sees as
Hmm.
positives. And
Yeah.
I mean, look at the age difference in Jake and Jesse. Like it looks like
Huge.
a good 15 years minimum, right? So yeah, and that I think that also took Jesse by surprise because he was like, "Whoa," and I think also it was easy for Jesse to accept blame for the joint because of that kind of thing. He almost probably felt bad for Jake at that point because he's like, I know I'm a freaking castaway and they're treating this guy like this and type of thing, and
Yeah.
that's why he
Yeah.
had no problem destroying the joint and was like, it's skunk weed. But
Right.
yeah, I thought that part was pretty interesting.
Like I said, it helps us know what the choices are for Jesse all the
Yep.
time. Because we start out seeing what Walt's are, right? Like
Yep.
his choices are right there with his life, with his family, and yet we see also that there's a lot of problems there. Okay, so what else do we need to talk about from this episode? So the mutual paranoia we talked about.
There was a part
Oh wait, can I add one
when
thing?
oh yeah, go for it.
Just to go back to the previous thing. Not only does Jesse have his family as a constant choice, if he wants, he could go back. I think it was interesting that showed him looking through his old drawings,
Oh yeah.
because it tells us not only does he have a family that loves him, but he has talent, right?
Right.
Sort of, right? Like he's talented. I couldn't draw those things, right?
Right,
So
but the
he's
things that he drew wasn't your typical, oh, sweetie, look what you drew. This is
of
beautiful,
course. Well, he's
you
a high
know?
schooler, at the time. So
Exactly. So who knows if he was actually like celebrated for those drawings or not. But the last drawing was telling. I loved it with Mr.
oh,
White, you
the
know?
one of Mr. White. Yeah, right,
Yeah,
right. Yeah,
because if you
that was funny.
remember, when he confronted him and he goes, "Hey, Mr. White, I got to know, some 60-year-old with a stick up his ass all of a sudden breaks bad." And the picture is literally with a
Oh,
stick up his ass. And
yeah,
I
right,
loved it
right.
because
No,
that
I
was
didn't catch that.
that
Yeah,
shows that well, you watch it 13 times, this is what happens.
I know.
Like
Yep,
this was his thought process on Mr. White forever,
right.
and that's why I think made him chuckle.
Yeah. Well, maybe there's nothing to it, but I thought it was important that he saved those, or someone saved
Yes.
them, right? And that he does have a talent. He does have promise in some way, right? And yet
Right.
he gave those up. So what else do we see here? So in this episode,
The
we see a couple instances of Walt trying to get the money that he took, from the Crazy Eight stash that he put in his ventilation HVAC.
yeah.
We also get confirmation that his crib was Tampico furniture.
Yep.
That was a little detail I noticed this time, which
Yep.
I didn't before. So
Yeah. At first he thought it was the bassinet, and then Crazy goes,
mm,
"No, we didn't make bassinets. It was probably the crib,
yeah,
And so
right,
that was that. I thought it was a pretty big part when, obviously the diagnosis has been told, and they're sitting there and they're going back and forth on strategies, right? And Marie's saying, "Hey, I'm gonna ask my people what they know." And anyways, the women go away, and then Hank says, "Hey, Walt, I just want you to know that no matter what happens, I will always take care of your family." And the first image you get of Walt's face is just straight like F you, man.
yeah.
Like
No,
it's
I
just
noted that
such
too. Yeah,
anger, because he is like, I am the man of my family. I will take care of it no matter what, and
mm,
he's just pissed off. He's not like,
yeah,
you know what? Thank you. Not like you. I feel like every normal person would be like, you know what? Thank you very much. Like I'm gonna do whatever it takes, but I'm glad to know that if something happens before I can decide my future, blah blah blah, that my family
hmm.
will be taken care of. And
Right.
his pride is shown
Yeah,
like
right.
just in front of everyone right here in that situation.
Yeah, no, his face is extremely telling. You're right.
Mm-hmm.
I noticed that as well. It was just odd. You're right. It was just an odd face to make. So when Jesse comes back with the money, it's interesting that Walt accuses him of wearing a wire,
Yeah, that was kind of weird.
right? So it tells me, yeah, Walt's paranoid, but
Mm-hmm.
he doesn't trust Jesse. And remember, that's because I think Crazy Eight planted that seed of doubt.
Yep. Yep. He
You
he
can't
said
trust that
he's a big talker.
big talker, right? Your problem is with that guy.
Yep.
And that was a brilliant move on Crazy Eight's point, right? Cause division and distrust between them. But that's still there, and we still see that.
Yeah. No, I love that Jesse just flung the money up in the air and he quickly picked it up.
Right,
Um,
right. Okay, so can we talk about Ken?
Ken wins.
Ken wins.
Oh
What a
man,
character.
what
What
a
a
douche,
character.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, I know, but he's such a perfect douche though. I
Oh,
mean,
he's the
everybody hates
perfect.
him. Everybody hates him.
Yeah. He's the perfect like male Karen that you could think of, and
Yeah,
oh
yeah.
yeah, that was great. I love that they split it up, that you
Two
saw
different
him.
scenes. Yeah, in
Yeah,
the bank.
because yeah, so you just knew him a little bit because like he's just really annoying, and then Walt gets to the teller, and the teller is very understanding. It's like, of course we can, cash this check on this date for you. Like she's just very comfortable with
Yeah,
that. But
yeah,
I love the fact that at the end, like Walt was just at the impasse where he had to put his anger out on someone, and he did just he's at a point where he just did not care. And
Right, right. So let's think about this. Talk about this for just a second. So what does Ken represent?
douche, I don't know.
Right. Yeah, but he's the kind of guy for whom everything's working out. Like
Yeah,
he's fortunate, right? Fortune smiles on him. He always wins. He always wins, right?
yeah.
He gets the car, he gets the woman, he
Hmm.
gets, whatever.
Yeah.
He's fortunate. Now he's a jerk, and that plays into it as well. But I think what Walt does when he short circuits his car battery, right? He sort of short circuits his luck, his fortune, right? The only way
Yeah.
that his fortune can be changed is if Walt chooses to put
Interrupt it.
himself, yeah, to interrupt it, yeah. And is that because Walt is envious of his good fortune? Does he think I'm doing the whole world a favor here by making this guy have a bad day?
Yeah, I think he was just pissed off. It reminds me a lot of how Walt reacted to Bogdan when he quit the car wash.
Uh-huh.
If you remember, like he as he quit, he grabbed himself and said, "Restrain this," and the way
Wipe
he
down
takes
this.
his
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah, the way he takes out his anger on people that are, it seems to the audience, is very deserving. So
Hmm.
it's very enjoyable from our perspective, even more so for Ken Wins, because this guy, just like you said, it's everyone that it's everything that everyone hates.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, what people want, and it's a virtue, I think, to be magnanimous when you are fortunate, when things go your way. It's like if you're a sports team and you win, if you gloat, in your victory, everybody hates that. Good sportsmanship means to come up to the losing team and say, "Hey, well played," right? Or something to that
Right,
effect, right? But Ken wins and he gloats, right? He doesn't.
right. Yeah.
And I'm wondering, yeah, again, I'm assuming no accidental details in this show. I'm assuming that the writer put everything intended everything. So I'm wondering, are there any qualities in Ken that Walt will start to manifest later on? I can't remember. You probably do, but maybe we just keep an eye out for that. So the thing that Walt really hates here, we'll see how he stacks up against that later.
Yeah, no, that makes sense to me.
Okay. Anything else in this episode?
At the very end, when they're deciding, they met with the doctor, the oncologist, the best,
Yeah.
the
Oh yeah. 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 Yeah.
and they're like, so we're gonna do this, right? And he was like, well, I figured we talked about this. And she's like, well, what is there to talk about? He's like, well, it's a $90,000 out of pocket. And he's kind of saying what I feel like most people would say. It's like, well, this is cancer. He doesn't mention, well, what if I die? But he says, well, what am I supposed to just leave you with that kind of debt?
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
that's not something she even thought of. But I feel like for a man, especially the married man, and a husband, and a parent,
He has to be
that's
thinking
something you
about that.
right. How could you not be thinking about that? I would think about that. And
Well,
I felt like that
I
was pretty telling. It's like $90,000. It's hard. it's one thing when it's like, okay, here's 5,000, you have the rest of your life to figure this out. But it's $90,000 to something that is, I don't know what I think he's making 30 grand a year, give or take, right? As a high school chemistry teacher. So it's like he he didn't want that burden. Like
Right.
that was the forefront of his thought process over everything, over him being present in their family and what it would mean to their family for him to still be alive and be there. Like the
Well,
debt
so it's
was more
another,
important.
that's right. It's another instance, though, of him being a rational actor. In his
Yeah.
mind, he's putting pros and cons on a notepad, right?
Hmm.
And he's trying to weigh them that way. And like I've said a couple times, that's not really like a very human way to act. It's a very robotic kind of way. Remember when he's asking Jesse, do you think Crazy Eight? He's a businessman. Will he'll think about this rationally. He'll approach this dilemma with cost benefit analysis like I would, and he'll
Hmm.
act accordingly, right? That's right now. That's who Walt is, and so he's bringing that. There's no there's no nobility. There's no sort of I'm going to go down in a blaze of glory. I'm going to fight this to the end. It's all very cold. It's not a very
Yeah.
heated, passionate thing. It's very cold.
Yep.
So what do you make of Walter Jr.'s outbursts when he hears Walt say that, right? Why don't you
Yeah.
just F and die? Why don't you just go ahead and die now?
Yeah.
So
Well, he
I think what he does there is he reminds Walt, sorry to interrupt, but he reminds Walt that, look, in your cost benefit analysis, you're forgetting that there are certain things that you cannot quantify.
right.
Like, what does a father mean to a son? How many dollar
Hmm.
bills is that worth to you, right? You can't measure that and put it on a piece of paper. And he's reminding him that that's part of being human too.
No, well, I was gonna say he brought that to his attention a little bit earlier when he was trying to get his last couple $100 bills out of the air vent. He just, what are you doing? And he was like, well, what do you mean? Like he wasn't even thinking about himself and his
Mm,
presence and what the value of his role in the family is to stay there. And obviously Walt Jr. is, I I even thought it was weird that Walt Jr. found out about it at the same time that Hank and Marie did, when he just was like, well, I have cancer. And
yeah, no, I assumed he would have been told in private
yeah,
earlier.
well, Skylar did say I hated that he found out this way later on. But that was kind of brought on by Skylar's
Okay, fair
outburst.
enough.
It wasn't
Yeah.
planned. So I get it from there, but
Well, we don't know what the occasion was for them all getting together, right? For the barbecue.
um
It
there
almost seemed
it didn't,
like
yeah.
I would have assumed that Skylar said, "Hey, let's have Hank and Marie over and let's tell them to get," like that was sort of the reason why they were there. I would think. But it goes on where you think, oh, he might not have even never mentioned it.
Yeah, it didn't seem planned. It seemed brought on based off of Hank's inquiry into their
Hmm.
past, you
Hmm.
know.
Right.
Um, so my guess it could have been easily Sunday family dinner type of scenario, They don't
Yeah.
they don't they don't go into that part.
Well, but your point was that he says, "Dad, you're acting weird," and
Hmm.
Walt says, "What do you mean weird?" And Walter Jr.'s thinking, "You're not acting in accord with the reality that you could die really soon. You
Right.
ought to be you ought to be more, I think maybe the word is sort of passionate, less rational, more, I don't know, you hug your kid more when you think you're going to lose them soon, right?
Right. What would you
You're
do if
wanting
you
to
knew you were gonna die very soon? Like you would think this person's response would be completely
a
out of the
much more
norm.
emotional
Yeah.
kind of thing. Yeah. You
and
would you
and
would want
his
to spend a
his
lot of quality
response was
time and
was very was very I wouldn't say calculated, but it was very like robotic in a way,
yeah.
like
Well, that's and maybe this is a really important point about the show in general is that the beginning is that we see that Walt approached all of life, and most importantly for the decision that he made with this, flashback that we're going to learn about more in the future, right? But so just hold on to that.
Mhm.
Walt's error as a human being is that he lives too much in a sort of rational way, and sort of what we've seen already is that doesn't make him happy. There's something missing. There's a nobility that's missing.
Yep.
There's nothing glorious in his life. It's all making the very safe, low risk calculations. Even when he's given a dire diagnosis, his thought isn't, oh, I should spend quality time with my family. It's, how can I make money to extend their comfortable material existence into the future
Right.
so that they can have a, go ahead.
He didn't even call his wife when he was in the ambulance and he came
Mhm.
to. I feel like any rational person would be like, hey, don't freak out. This happened. This is where I'm going, So, I mean, I'm also not, I didn't just turn 50 the day before.
I think part of the reason he doesn't do that is he's terrified of how much it's going to cost and he doesn't want her to know.
Right. That was the overwhelming part that kind of took over his rationale, like his thought process, Who's to say you wouldn't be? You got to put yourself in that scenario.
No, that's exactly right, which is why I think this is one reason why this show has a lot of value for us as human beings living today in these circumstances and sort of suburban situations often, where life can become about really nothing more than material existence, extending our comfortable living, right? Without any kind of nobility, without any kind of greatness, without that human connection, right? Most of the time we move to a place where we can get a good job far away from our families so that we can get a lot of money so that we can live very comfortable lives that are very safe and secure. One of the lessons again of the show is that it's raising raising the question to us, are we happy? How's that working out for us, right? I think that's one question that we get right now through the show that is kind of haunting in a way.
Yeah, it's very haunting because it doesn't really show how long was Walter in this life that was just obviously so miserable in episode 1, like it is so robotic. He was literally just going through the motions at this point. We're only 4 episodes in, so who knows what's going to happen. Well,
Right.
I do, but there's that.
That's right. Okay, well, I think we've squeezed enough out of this episode. I don't think we can get anything more.
Yep.
What do you think?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll wrap it up here then and pick up with episode 5 next. So we'll see you all on the other side.